I went grocery shopping and brought back absolutely every fruit I could find. This is pretty much all the fruits you can buy these days in a big supermarket in France. The wide variety of options available today is a recent development despite the absence of grapes. Because many of these fruits that are familiar to us are produced by plants that originally only grew thousands of kilometers from here and were completely unknown to us. Today, borders have disappeared and edible plants have never traveled so much. But for thousands of years, what you found on market stalls came almost entirely from what grew nearby. To prove it, we're going to remove from all these fruits we've managed to find, all those that would have been almost impossible to get. Even to organize a prince's banquet, just 3 centuries ago in France. Bananas, oranges, strawberries, pomelos, watermelons, kiwis, mangoes, pineapples, and other exotic fruits are gone. Going even further back in time, 1,000 years ago, it would also have been nearly impossible to find apricots, melons, or lemons in Europe. And here is the full range of fruits you could have eaten over the course of a year. Almost a millennium ago, grapes were absent in France. To go from this to that, it certainly took roads, trucks, cargo ships, and airplanes. But also, and above all, hundreds of generations of farmers who, harvest after harvest, knew how to select the right seeds. And so, slowly sculpt these foods, and adventurers and merchants to make them travel. Let's explore the amazing biological and geographical origins of fruits, starting with a simple orange. Before I bought it, the one I'm holding in my hand probably made a very long journey by truck up north to Europe, from Spain, Morocco, or Italy. This orange is part of the 75 million tons that are produced every year on hundreds of thousands of sunny hectares. Sweet to the taste, it grew on an orange tree planted around the year 2000, back when YouTube didn't even exist yet. And the tree that gave birth to it was necessarily grafted. Because all orange trees with a sweet taste are grafted, otherwise they degenerate, become sour, or susceptible to diseases. In plantations, to produce sweet oranges, we cut small branches from orange trees whose taste we like and attach them to other trees. Often a bitter orange tree trunk, and it grows. Orange trees in large plantations are composite bodies, Frankenstein-like plants that are entirely natural. But we can trace the origin of this sweet orange even further back, because its fruits only appeared in Europe in the 15th century, when they arrived by ship in the ports of Genoa and Lisbon. At that time, an orange was really something special. And the orange tree, it's a star, a royal plant whose fruits aren't used to make juice, but to decorate gardens. European courts built orangeries to shield orange trees from harsh winter conditions. Before the 15th century, there were only bitter oranges in Europe, produced by the bitter orange tree, which, for its part, was brought to the old continent much earlier by the Arabs. But even there, we can go back even further, because the original source of the sweet orange is actually in northern India and Vietnam, as well as southern China. The sweet orange originated in these warm regions, or more precisely, that it was created by humans who had the good idea to deliberately hybridize mandarin and pomelo trees. The sweet orange was born from the remarkable crossings between 2 closely related species around 2,500 years ago. It's actually amazing to think that originally there were only 3 wild citrus species in all of Asia: pomelos, mandarins, and citrons. And it's by continually crossing these species that we eventually created lemons, oranges, grapefruits, clementines, yuzu, kumquats, kaffir limes, and Buddha's hand. Yes, absolutely, all these fruits owe their existence to humanity. Although all citrus fruits originate from Asia, today they are mainly produced in Brazil. And before the arrival of Europeans in America, there wasn't a single orange in Florida, nor a single lemon anywhere on the entire American continent. In fact, you can take any one of these fruits, and then you're holding a bit of the world's history in the palm of your hand. Take a kiwi, look at it closely. Before the 1970s, almost no one had seen one in Europe. If we call this fruit a kiwi, it's because it looks a bit like the strange bird of the same name, which is only found in New Zealand. But to be honest, I don't see the resemblance. Besides, unlike the bird, the kiwi fruit only arrived on these volcanic islands shortly before the First World War. So there were none of these fruits in New Zealand just over a century ago. Originally, the vine that produces the kiwi, because its fruits grow on vines that are not called the kiwi tree. But the actinidia was domesticated in China nearly 2,000 years ago, at a time when, on the other side of the world, the Roman Empire ruled over Europe. In fact, being relatively blasé about the existence of all these sweet wonders is actually quite a new thing. There was a time when tasting or simply being in the presence of a pineapple would provoke overwhelming emotions. Heart racing, sighs of admiration and fascination. Meanwhile, it's undeniable that the pineapple is truly peculiar. If you've never seen what a plantation looks like, here are some pictures. Contrary to implications of the most hated pizza by Italians, this fruit doesn't come from Hawaii but from southern Brazil, where Tupi-Guarani peoples domesticated bromeliads. As the Greeks entered the Iron Age, long before Europeans arrived, the pineapple was shared from person to person for centuries. And when, in 1493, Christopher Columbus landed in America for the second time, the pineapple had already traveled thousands of kilometers to the point that it could be found in the Caribbean. For the Indians who lived there, it was a welcome gift. And it drove the Europeans completely crazy. The fruit fascinated them, but the problem was that they didn't like sea voyages. The delicate plant only bears fruit in tropical climates. So during the Renaissance, it was a fantasy. Nobles and the bourgeois dreamed of it. They comb it, sculpt it, but no one eats it. This type of pine cone, which is crowned in shape and the source of its name. Pineapple, pomme de pin in English, piña in Spanish, thus becomes a myth, the king of fruits. In the 15th and 16th centuries, Europeans spread it everywhere throughout the tropics, but in Europe they don't grow, not even around the Mediterranean. In the 17th century, the Dutch successfully cultivated them in heated greenhouses. The English followed suit and built orangeries for pineapples. To ripen a single fruit, it often takes nearly 3 years. 3 years of careful attention, of simulated tropical temperatures under glass houses constantly supplied with manure. A colossal endeavor resulting in an absurd outcome. Pineapples were so expensive to produce that some fruits could be worth the price of a painting. But most of the time, people don't eat the pineapple, they rent it. Yes, you heard that right. To impress, to wow the guests, people rent pineapples, similar to renting a luxury car for a wedding. The fruit then goes from living room to living room, star of a ball, guest star of a dinner, until the final fermentation. And it's represented everywhere. In the United Kingdom, pineapples sit in gold on the towers of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. In Ireland, they even build entire buildings in its likeness. Louis XIV had one grown in Versailles just to show that the gardens of the Sun King could grow anything. The monarch tasted the fruit but found it too fibrous. Its purpose was not to please the palate, but to impress garden visitors. In short, for nearly 2 centuries, the pineapple in Europe was more of a symbol than a fruit. Even today, this jewel can be found everywhere in decor and pop culture. As proof SpongeBob lives in one. But the most produced and most consumed of all fruits is the banana. Globally, around 100 billion are consumed annually. Originally, all bananas don't come from Africa, but from Papua New Guinea. The plant that produces these wonders, the banana plant, isn't really a small tree, but a giant herb with an amazing flower. What you're seeing here is actually an inflorescence. The flowers are the little white and yellow things at the base, which in nature, after being pollinated, often by sphinx moths, bats, or hummingbirds, depending on the continent, turn into bananas. And a bunch of bananas can hold up to 200 fruits. Despite its puzzling ordinariness, the banana is amazing. When you look at the diversity of varieties that exist all over the tropics, there are no fewer than 1,500 different varieties. Small ones, big ones, red ones, blue ones. Most are eaten raw and sweet, but some, like the plantain banana, are cooked and savory. But despite this great diversity, there is only one variety that is massively exported all over the world, the Cavendish, the perfect banana, because the Cavendish does not need pollination. With it, the flower spontaneously fills with tender flesh. As a result, no seeds, no pits, just pulp. Moreover, this variety grows at human height, so it's easy to harvest. It has just the right curve to fit into boxes, stays firm when it's green, withstands sea travel, and ends up ripening when it reaches its destination. Moreover, it's delicious and widely enjoyed. In short, it has everything going for it, except that the Cavendish has a major flaw. Lacking pips and seeds, it's sterile. So all the bananas we eat are produced by clones from these offshoots. And so they all have the same genetic makeup, the same strengths, and the same weaknesses. If a disease affects them very quickly, the entire global production is impacted. And that's exactly what's happening right now because of the Fusarium oxysporum fungus, which is attacking the Cavendish. Nothing and no one has been able to stop it. Because without genetic diversity, this variety of banana has no plan B. So, without an effective treatment against the fungus, the Cavendish is at risk of almost disappearing soon. Worldwide, people are constantly crossbreeding, hybridizing, and testing to discover the next chosen one, but currently, there is none. This disaster movie that's unfolding before our eyes is actually a remake. Because before the Cavendish, there was the Gros Michel. This variety of banana was, at the beginning of the 19th century, the first exotic fruit produced for mass export. On paper, the Gros Michel was also perfect, but it too was cloned from Roger. And in the 1960s, Gros Michel was almost everywhere in the world wiped out by a strain of Fusarium. Except for Thailand, where it is still grown today, this variety has now practically disappeared. And if you want to get an idea of the taste of these bananas without going to Southeast Asia, you just have to try a flavored yogurt. Because artificial banana flavor is from Gros Michel, not Cavendish. It's quite possible that some of you have never tasted real vanilla. Vanilla originates from Mexico, not Madagascar. That doesn't change its taste, but it changes everything about its sex life. Because in Mexico, vanilla developed an exclusive relationship with a bee, a small local bee, which is the only species that can pollinate it naturally. Today, in the Indian Ocean or in the Polynesian Islands, in the absence of bees capable of pollinating it, vanilla must be fertilized by hand, flower by flower. Since it was developed in the 19th century on Reunion Island by a 12-year-old slave named Edmund Albus. The method of hand-pollinating vanilla has hardly changed. And it remains a colossal task because the flowers only bloom for a few days and only open at night. Which partly explains its price. Today, vanilla pods are among the most expensive agricultural products in the world and are also one of the few orchids cultivated for cooking. Which is pretty crazy when you know that orchids are among the most diverse flowering plants on the planet. But if everyone knows the taste of vanilla today, it's not really thanks to this orchid, which climbs like a vine, and whose fruit price can soar up to 2,500 euros per kilo. Because less than 20 years after the discovery of manual pollination, European chemists managed to isolate the main aroma of vanilla, to write its magical chemical formula, vanillin, and very quickly they managed to reproduce it in the laboratory. It was in 1858, and this molecule would become the very first artificial flavor in history. It was then made from resin, conifer, or tar. This opened the door to a revolution in both the food industry and perfumery. And here, I need to make a side note. If vanilla is the first artificial fruit flavor, can we ask what the first natural sweet flavor was, the very first fruit? This profound question takes us back to the origins of flowering plants, because from a botanical point of view, fruits are the final stage of flowers. Plants that don't produce flowers, like ferns, mosses, or conifers, don't produce fruits. For hundreds of millions of years, plants have developed defense strategies to avoid being eaten by the entire animal world. Depends on them for their survival. And to defend themselves, they gradually became experts in poison, in repellents, or covered themselves with spikes. But 130 million years ago, a small lineage of plants found a balance. A new winning strategy, the give and take approach. They produce nectar as an offering for insects, who in return help with fertilization, which is called animal pollination. Following this logic, other plants develop something even crazier. Parts of themselves meant to be eaten. Fruits are offered to large animals so that they eat their seeds, their future offspring, and thus spread their descendants. It is this incredibly fertile double alliance, made of two types of offerings, that made flowering plants the dominant form of life. And by far, on our planet, in terms of weight, number of species, and occupied spaces, competition and collaboration are the driving forces of evolution. In the natural world, it's not one or the other, it's both. Many forget that Darwin spent the end of his life studying orchids, fascinated by their alliance with the world of insects. The human domestication of plants only continues and accelerates this story, making it more productive and giving it sweeter fruits that are easier to preserve. From what we know, one of the first flowering plants to be domesticated by Homo sapiens was neither the banana, nor a citrus fruit, nor even a cereal. It was the fig that, shortly before wheat and barley, appeared in the fertile lands of the crescent that bears the same name. The fig is therefore one of the oldest fruits we have created, and it is also one of the strangest. First of all, figs are produced by the ficus family. Some are vines, others are huge trees, and all of them produce figs that are very rarely edible. But what's even more unusual about figs is that these thousands of tiny flowers are hidden inside a fleshy pouch. Once fertilized, they each turn into tiny fruits, each containing a small seed. That's a fruit in the botanical sense. Of the 7,500 species of ficus, which are mostly tropical, only one grows in the wild. In our latitudes, the common fig. And that's where it gets crazy. Because you see, this little hole at the bottom of our figs is a kind of biological lock reserved for a tiny wasp, which is the only one capable of entering and pollinating them. Co-evolution in all its glory. In fact, it's not uncommon to find a wasp trapped in the flesh of figs before eating them. And it's amazing to think that in the Jewish religion, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil on which it grows. The only forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden is a fig. The forbidden fruit for Christians, on the other hand, has become much more iconic. Drawn on computers since 1976 and present in Normandy since the beginning of the Middle Ages. The apple originates from Central Asia, in the region where China, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan meet today. Its wild ancestor Malus cerevisiae still grows there today. The seeds of these apples then spread along with many other plant species along what would later become the Silk Roads, moving from east to west through regions that fortunately have more or less similar climates. Because humans don't just select at high speed. On top of that, they also disperse. The original peach tree was also carried along the same trade routes from China to India, then to the Middle East. It is believed that Alexander the Great brought the peach back to the Mediterranean before his conquest of Persia, which is why its scientific name is Prunus persica. But the peach is originally from China, and the country still remains by far the world's largest producer. The apricot, like the apple, pear, and peach, belongs to the Rosaceae family. And like the latter, it originates from China. Beneath the velvety skin of this traveling fruit, which loves warm climates and whose taste is reminiscent of summer, lies a long history, like the Silk Road. It was first domesticated in China more than 2,000 years ago, then transported by the Persians. Cherished by the Armenians, hence its Latin name Prunus armeniaca. Finally, it was spread by the wind, moving east to west by Alexander the Great and the Arabs. In Europe, the apricot arrived during the Renaissance via Muslim Spain. It wasn't until the 17th century that it truly captivated France, found in abundance in Louis XIV's garden orchards. The mango, which is a guilty pleasure for many people, does it originate from India? And to this day, it is still mainly produced in that country, which accounts for 60% of the world's production. If the pineapple is the king of fruits, the mango is their god. The majestic mango trees have taken root in all the tropical and subtropical lands of the planet. So much so that, in many of these regions, it was said that during mango season, which lasts between 2 and 4 months, hunger does not exist. A single mango tree can yield up to 350 kilos of fruit annually. Today, out of the 400 varieties of mangoes that exist, only about 10 are sold in Europe, which really isn't much. Take a good look at this image. These are all the varieties of mango that grow on the big island of Hawaii. Among all the fruits we eat, those with the most unexpected, epic, and global history are perhaps strawberries. You are probably very familiar with wild strawberries, Fragaria vesca, found almost everywhere in Eurasia and North America at the edge of forests. Naturally, we might think that these are the ones that must have been domesticated to give rise to this global star. Ice creams, pies, and artificial flavors. Well, not at all. The strawberries we eat are a hybrid of 2 wild strawberries, one from South America and the other from North America. The first, Fragaria chiloensis, comes to us, as its name suggests, from Chile, and was secretly brought back by a scientist and spy who worked for the Count of Louis XIV, and whose name was destined to go down in history, or at least in this story, Amédée François Fraisier. Unfortunately for him, and fortunately for us, Fraisier only brought back female plants of the Chilean strawberry from his journey. So it did not bear fruit, neither in the king's garden nor in his garden in Plougastel. Fortunately, another strawberry variety was already growing in Fraisier's garden. This variety had been brought back from Virginia by another expedition a few years earlier. And by another lucky coincidence, the Virginia strawberries pollinated the Chilean strawberries and gave rise to Fragaria ananassa, which owes its name to the fact that the person who named it thought it had a slight pineapple flavor. This new variety of strawberry would go on to achieve worldwide success. Today, China is the leading producer of this little miracle from Plougastel. With 3 million tons of fruit harvested in 2023, that's equivalent to the world's total production in the year 2000. Like many other fruits, strawberries are highly seasonal. And if, in autumn and winter, you miss fruit as much as you miss the sun, turn instead to a cousin of strawberries. The pear, another member of the rose family, has thousands of cultivated varieties. This immense genetic diversity is due to the fact that wild pear trees grow and naturally hybridize almost everywhere in Eurasia. Today, the pear is the 8th most consumed fruit in the world. The first unbeatable is still the banana. The second one is the heaviest one I found at the market. The watermelon, which originates from the Nile Valley, is also called the watermelon. In its original desert, this plant was an oasis. It can be found depicted in the pharaoh's tombs inside the pyramids. And it's said that watermelon gave the entire Napoleonic army diarrhea during the Egyptian campaign, because the soldiers, tempted by its taste and tormented by thirst, couldn't stop eating it. A good way to see how watermelons have evolved over time is to look at still lifes. In fact, in this one, you can see the flesh of the fruit becoming redder and redder over time. Today, you can find seedless watermelons and even square watermelons. There's no genetic manipulation or witchcraft behind this production technique from Japan. You just need to grow the fruit in a cage. Because made up of 90% water, the watermelon has the strange characteristic of being able, like liquids, to almost perfectly take the shape of its container. Much less malleable in its shape, the melon originally comes from tropical Africa, where in its original form, it is very small and bitter. And then, in the 5th century before Christ, the Egyptians selected it and managed to obtain larger and sweeter fruits. 5 centuries later, it was found in southern Italy and started to become truly sweet. Then it took nearly 1,300 years before it arrived in France after Charles VIII brought them back from Naples. It is said that an excessive passion for this fruit cost the life of Pope Paul II in 1470 and then Clement VIII in 1605. Several texts indeed report that during the beautiful season, the wealthiest could eat 3 or 4 of them in a single meal, sometimes with terrible consequences for their tired digestion. Cherries are remarkable in that there are more than 600 different varieties, all of which descend from the wild cherry tree, also known as Myriciae prunus avium. Archaeological discoveries attest to the presence and consumption of these fruits in Europe as early as the Neolithic period. Wild cherries, which are called mérices, are sweet but bitter, without being sour. It is believed that their first domestication took place in the region of the Caucasus and Anatolia. Since the early Middle Ages, cherry trees have been cultivated in France for their fruit but also for their valuable wood. Very seasonal, cherries are associated with the month of May, even though recent crossbreeding with wild cherry trees has made it possible to extend the harvest into the heart of summer. And that's a crucial piece of information that I have to share with you. There is a sport that involves spitting cherry pits as far as possible. The world record is 28 meters. Do with that information what you will. Under its pink, spiky skin, the lychee hides a pearly, juicy, sweet flesh and a whole story. It comes to us from southern China, and the first known mention appears in a Chinese record dated 111 before Christ, where the emperor demands that 16 lychee trees be planted in his gardens. In Asia, these fruits are often eaten, dried, and used to flavor drinks. Sometimes they are even fermented to make lychee wine. In Europe, it wasn't until the 17th century that naturalists began to report the existence of the lychee. It was introduced to Réunion in 1764, and soon after it began to grow on the large island of Madagascar. That's where most of the lychees consumed in France during the winter come from. Even though Chinese production is still, in terms of volume, 10 times greater than that of Madagascar, let's stay with fruits that grow in clusters and take a look at the history of grapes, which from the very beginning has been linked to that of wine. The vine held a special place among the Egyptians, Hebrews, Phoenicians, Greeks, and Romans who famously introduced it. In France, yes, good wine was originally Italian. It seems that wild grapevines were originally domesticated in the region of the Caucasus and the Near East. Shortly after people started cultivating wheat and barley, which means that beer most likely existed before wine. One of the unique features of grapes and their transformation into alcohol is their ability to be associated with the sacred, especially in the Catholic religion, where it represents the blood of Christ. In the 13th century, the entire left bank of the Seine, within the walls of the city of Paris, was dedicated to vineyards. And it would take several famines for these vineyards to be replaced by wheat. In the 19th century, French grape production was devastated by phylloxera, a pest insect that attacks vines and came from America. And it's amazing to think that the vineyards were saved thanks to the use of American grafts that were resistant to the pathogens. And almost all vines today are descended from them, making the grape clusters from our regions true products of globalization. Like the plum, Prunus domestica is a stone fruit related to peaches and apricots, however. But it's also a false friend because unlike those two, it doesn't come from China. Plums have actually been cultivated for thousands of years in Europe and Western Asia. Pliny the Elder mentions several varieties of plums in his natural history, highlighting their diversity and popularity. The Romans were probably among the first to introduce it from Syria, where it was already appreciated. But it was mainly the Crusaders who brought back damask plum trees during the Middle Ages. And from these trees, varieties such as the Mirabelle, the Ketch, and the Dente plum were created in Europe. Once dried, it becomes the famous Agen prune, which keeps well and aids digestion. Personally, ma queen remains the queen. a green, sweet mango with a tangy skin, and which, introduced in France in the 16th century, owes its name to Claude of France, the wife of Francis I. The raspberry doesn't have the name of a queen, and yet it would deserve it. Originally from Europe and temperate and cold Asia, where it can be found from Turkey to Siberia, including China and Japan. The Greeks and Romans who adopted it often used it in medicine for its astringent and diuretic properties. Yes, raspberries can help with urination. I wasn't aware of that either. In the Middle Ages, these fruits became increasingly appreciated and could be found in many monastic and royal gardens. Although raspberry cultivation has developed almost everywhere possible over the centuries, because the fruits are delicate and the yields are relatively modest, production remains limited in volume. On the other hand, since raspberries freeze very well, they are widely used in pastry making throughout the year. In fact, the most surprising aspect is that, despite the richness of what I brought back, I must admit it remains relatively meager. Compared to the immense diversity of fruits that exist in the world, especially in the tropics. Because the exuberance of equatorial regions has offered humanity a field of possibilities and dizzying delights in terms of domestication, but whose treasures often remain confined to these hot and humid regions, because they are often difficult to export or simply relatively ignored. The fruits I'll discuss now are among those that don't travel far. And while some of them are probably very familiar to you, I bet there are some you've never heard of. Let's start with the most common ones, those that are rarely eaten in Europe. Prickly pears get their name from the one given to the Maghreb by the Romans. Even though the world's top 3 producers today are Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, the prickly pear doesn't come from this region at all. In Arabic, its name means Christian fig, but again, that's a false lead. Moreover, the plant bearing these fruits is not a fig tree but a cactus. Its scientific name, Opuntia ficus indica, can help us see things more clearly because indica refers to the Indies and therefore to the Americas. In Mexico, its land of origin, the cactus that produces these fruits is even present on the country's flag. Elsewhere in the world, people could do without it. Because today, the plant is considered an invasive species in many desert regions of the world where it has been introduced, like in Australia, Hawaii, South Africa, Madagascar, and the Mediterranean basin. Once peeled to remove their spines, prickly pears reveal beneath their skin a flesh that resembles that of a colorful, sweet, juicy, and refreshing cucumber. Dragon fruits grow in many places around the world. They're also called pitayas. I personally imagined for a long time that they came from Asia, when in fact the climbing cactus species that produces them was actually domesticated in Central America. When you know that almost all cacti originate from the New World, it's not really surprising. These dragon fruit cacti produce magnificent, huge flowers that bloom only for a single night, in the hope of being pollinated by moths or bats. And while all these fruits can be easily found in some specialty grocery stores, that's not always the case. Are there oddities produced by cacti? In France, for example, you will hardly ever find cactus blueberries, which look like blueberries that grow on cacti. And apparently, they have a sweet taste similar to that of kiwi. You will also hardly ever find Peruvian apple cactus fruits, which vaguely look like apples and have a pronounced sweet and sour flavor. Now we've reached a category of fruits that are entirely unfamiliar to most of us. Among these exotic and unusual fruits, there's one of the most controversial, durian, which is known for smelling so strong that it's banned on public transportation in Asia. And its taste, which is a subject of debate, is described as a mix of almond cream and sweet onion. On the other hand, mangosteen, a fruit native to Southeast Asia, looks like a strange cross between a lychee and an orange. And its thick purplish rind protects a juicy, sweet, and slightly tangy ivory white flesh, which is often unanimously loved. As for me, I promised myself to taste it at least once before I die. To canistels, cherimoyas, lulos, and baobab fruits, which are known for being as dry as chalk and naturally turning into a tangy powder, a bit like lemon candy. And tusalax, also known as snake fruit because of their beautiful scaly skin, and which is actually the fruit of a palm tree, like dates or coconuts. From what I've read, it's supposed to be crunchy, sweet, and a bit astringent. What a journey it must be to bite into lucumas. These fruits from the Andes, with their yellow flory flesh, are said to taste like caramel and maple syrup. What an experience it must be to bite into a black sapote. Also called chocolate pudding fruit, with its brown creamy flesh that vaguely tastes like ripe cocoa. Originally from Central America, black sapotes filled the market stalls of the ancient cities of the Maya. And the latex produced by the trees that bear them was long used to make chewing gum. One day, maybe I'll have the chance to taste a jackie fruit, which apparently tastes like a mix between mango, banana, and pineapple. And which are by far the largest fruits in the world to grow on a tree. The largest of them can reach up to 40 kilos. I've likely forgotten some unique or rare fruits. So, let me know in the comments the names of the unusual ones you've had the chance to taste and that I haven't mentioned. And also, I'd be curious to know which ones are at the top of your list and which ones disappointed you or personally left you indifferent. For me, it's definitely ripe papaya. I find that this fruit, which was domesticated more than 4,000 years ago in Central America, is the only one whose taste and texture are much more interesting before it has ripened. Maybe that's the reason why papayas rarely leave their regions of production, where they are mainly harvested and consumed in India, Brazil, or Mexico. In short, definitely it's hidden in the fruits I've managed to gather here, as well as in those I couldn't find. Thousands of years of evolution, slow and gradual migrations throughout most of human history, and giant leaps across continents or over oceans during the last 3 centuries of globalization.